Hi, my name is Ray Silverman. I teach at Bryn Athyn College in Bryn Athyn, Pennsylvania. I teach courses in religion and English. Our subject today is you shall not commit adultery, or on the positive side, honor marriage. Now up to this point we have covered several commandments, beginning with you shall have no other gods before me, and we pointed out that that corresponds to the Lord's Prayer, our Father who art in heaven. And then we did you shall not take the Lord's name in vain, which corresponds to from the Lord's Prayer, hallowed be thy name. And we did the Sabbath day, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy, which corresponds in the Lord's Prayer to thy kingdom come, thy will be done. That gives us a sense of the Sabbath. And then we did honor father and mother, as it is in heaven, honoring our Heavenly Father. We honor our mother on earth, the church, everyone, the communion of saints who has brought the light of truth and the gift of love to us. Honor your father and mother as in heaven, so upon the earth, or on earth as it is in heaven. And we did you shall not murder. And of course the opposite of murder is be a life giver. And we pray, give us this day our daily bread. Give us what to think, give us what to feel, inspire us, give us that daily bread. And so we become life givers as well, not murderers. Today, we're talking about not committing adultery. You shall not commit adultery. It's a big one because it relates to God's most sacred gift, his highest blessing. Swedenborg says that marriage is the greatest gift on earth and in heaven, and anything that hurts it or violates it in any way, including adultery, should not be done. Therefore, God says, you shall not commit adultery. And keep in mind that these are not just commandments, they're also promises. There'll become a time when there'll be no adultery. We will not even desire to commit adultery because we will see how special and beautiful and how wonderful marriage is. I wanted to read to you some of the scriptures from the world religions that speak about not committing adultery. An ongoing theme of this series and the two books that Star and I wrote about the Ten Commandments is that the Ten Commandments appear in all the world religions. This is not just Judaism, this is not just Christianity, but it's also Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and every great religion. So I'll just read some brief excerpts about honoring marriage in the great religions. From the Old Testament, very succinct, you shall not commit adultery. From the New Testament, the words of Jesus, you have heard that it was said to those of old, do not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. From the Quran, come not near to adultery. Lo, it is an abomination and an evil way. And from the Noble Eightfold Path of Buddhism, right action is to abstain from sexual lust. Isn't it interesting that in Buddhism, it's just like the Ten Commandments. Last time, right action is to not harm anyone. You shall not murder. And here, right action is to abstain from sexual lust. And finally, from the work Conjugal Love by Emanuel Swedenborg, true marriage love from its divine origin is celestial, spiritual, holy, pure, and clean. So that's just a little brief survey of world religions, culminating in what I said is the crown. There's like a king's crown where there's a gem for every religion to have its place. And the new church, as I see it anyway, shows the beauty of every religion. And I'm reminded of something that Helen Keller once said. She spoke well about the Baha'i faith. And the next morning in the New York Herald, there was a big article about how Helen Keller had converted to the Baha'i faith. Oh. And she wrote back and she said, I didn't convert. I have great respect for the teachings of all religious leaders and all religions. But why should I change my faith, which is Sweden origin? Because it shows me what is good and what is noble in every faith. Here for Helen. Yeah, right, yeah. I wasn't prepared to, that was not in my notes, by the way. That was an off the cuff, but somehow I was inspired to tell you that. I also want to tell you about a famous study called the marshmallow study. How many of you have heard of the marshmallow study? Oh, good. You know it. And then for those who don't, it'll be interesting news. There was a study conducted in the 1950s by a fellow named Walter Mischel, and he was at Stanford University. They had 500 young people, 4 and 5 years old, who were given the opportunity to eat one marshmallow, and if they waited, they would get a second marshmallow. But they could eat the marshmallow right away, but they just wouldn't get the second marshmallow. So you can see this on YouTube. Just put in marshmallow experiment or the marshmallow study, and you see these little children. It's funny and it's poignant. They are sitting on their hands, they're sniffing it, they're licking it, they're doing everything they can not to eat this marshmallow. Some just eat it right away and that's it. And some actually withstand all of the impulse to eat the marshmallow, and they wait and they get a second marshmallow. Well, the most interesting part of the study is that there were follow-ups when these children were in their teens, when they were in their 20s, and when they're in their 30s. And I wanted to read to you a little bit about the follow-up. The most interesting aspect of the experiment involves the longitudinal follow-up studies. When those who participated in the study were tracked down in their late teens, again in their 20s, and a final time in their 30s, Dr. Mischel found that those who had been able to delay gratification had significantly better scores on every life satisfaction and achievement test administered. In fact, their scores far exceeded those who were unable to delay gratification. On average, they were more successful at coping with life and had more stable marriages and families. So it was just a very important conclusion of the study that there is a power in the ability to delay gratification. How is this related to you shall not commit adultery? Well, I think it's fairly obvious that, the urge to enter into a sexual union with another person is very, very powerful. And that urge needs to be delayed until a proper time. I'm teaching a course now at Brenathan College called Exploring Romantic Relationships. And favorite book that the students read in that course, and every year it's the favorite book, is called How to Avoid Falling in Love with the Jerk. Any teenagers in the room? Teenagers? Pay special attention to this section of the lecture. Okay. This is how to avoid falling in love with a jerk. Okay. Do you know how? Well, yeah, you might want to get the book. There are a number of red flags you look out for. Like, the jerk is very, very nice to you, but rude to other people. Oh, watch out for that. The jerk says that he or she will show up at a certain time, and they don't. So they don't keep their word. They're rude to others. There's lots of things, lots of red flags. And then there's a sequence that you follow in developing a relationship. First of all, you get to know the person. Takes a while to get to know someone, doesn't it? And then you trust them. Often people start trusting people before they even know them, and then you're setting yourself up for heartbreak. Teens, you getting this? Okay. Okay. So you got to know them before you can trust them. And once you trust them, you can rely on them. You can count on them. You can bank on them. But can you imagine relying on someone that you don't know, you can't trust? Why would you rely on someone like that? So know, trust, rely. And the next step is commit. And the final step is touch. And believe it or not, even today in 2019, the students all say, yeah. They say, that's why I got hurt. That's why I was heartbroken, because I touched and committed, relied and trusted before I even knew the person. Next time, I'm going to get it right. And it's beautiful stuff. Now, teens, you don't have to listen to anything else in this letter. As long as you got that. So, college students who take the course, that's one course, Exploring Romantic Relationships. There's other courses, of course, on the 10 Commandments. And one of the commandments, of course, is you shall not commit adultery. And I wanted to share with you some of the journal entries from the students from the book Rise Above It, Spiritual Development for College Students. The first one I want to do is about the hookup culture. Okay, so a student who had never quite gotten over a breakup decided that a hookup might be the answer. In her journal, she puts it like this. Everybody know what a hookup is, right? You know, just a quick sexual relationship without any commitment. You're just hooking up, you're like plugging into a socket, and that's it, you know. Okay. In my life, I have had, I shouldn't have said that. Can you get that off of the YouTube? Okay, so in my life, I have had only one romantic relationship, but I believed it was real and that we were really in love. We dated for 3 years. He was my best friend. When we finally broke up, he told me that we couldn't be friends anymore, which hurt almost more than the breakup itself. It's been 1.5 years since the breakup, and we still don't talk. I tell myself that I'm over it and have moved on, but I still feel lonely and resentful. I haven't had a good relationship since the breakup, and I believe that negative emotions connected with that experience have led me down a desperate path. This term, I've been going through a phase of feeling extremely lonely and not connected to anyone. It led me into a series of hookups that I knew would be short-lived and would fail. I didn't care. I also went to parties where I dressed inappropriately and made out with boys I had no relationship with. Sometimes I didn't even know their name. She discovers, however, that this lifestyle left her feeling deeply dissatisfied with herself. She continues, last week I was at another party. I was in the middle of dancing and suddenly felt gross. I had an overwhelming feeling that I had lost respect for myself. The thought came to me, I want to go back to a time when my body was respected and the love I gave meant something real. She concludes by rekindling her hope for marriage. In the light of this commandment, I can now see what has been going on. I've been depressed and lonely, which led to the party behavior lifestyle. I thought it might help, but in reality, I was not respecting myself or the boys I was with. Although I'm disappointed by my adulterous behavior, I know that God forgives me, and I have forgiven myself. I'm going to fight this urge from now on. I know who I want to become and the kind of life I want to have. I know that I need to respect myself and respect others because we are all on the path toward a wonderful marriage relationship. Committing adultery on any level hurts that journey. So that was that student's journal entry. Now, it's very important that I don't leave the students feeling guilty and further depressed because of what they've done. So forgiving ourselves, not just the students forgiving themselves, but every one of us in this room and in the listening audience, whatever we've done, there's the possibility for forgiveness. I got onto the idea, Star and I got onto the idea of forgiveness when we were lining up the 10 Commandments with the Lord's Prayer. And after, give us this day our daily bread, which lines up with do not murder, be a life giver, the very next verse of the 10 Commandments is forgive us our debts as we also forgive our debtors. And if you go into the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus is giving his most beautiful teachings about marriage and not having hardness of heart, it's surrounded with teachings about forgiveness. That's where he talks about forgiving your brother 70 times 7, is where he talks about, having a soft heart, not a hard heart. So forgiveness is like just intrinsically connected to adultery and the whole idea of forgiveness. So this student here is writing about forgiving himself. I want to read this one to you. I thought this was especially pertinent. Forgiving ourselves. He writes, I knew that marriage was going to be the most important thing in my life, but when it came to lust, I felt helpless. Lust was constant, and it was weakening me physically and spiritually. My father had told me that I should stay away from internet sites that were filled with the lusts and desires of humanity, as any father should. He made the act of watching pornography so bad that whenever I couldn't resist my lusts, I felt like the worst person in the world, headed straight for hell. When I went to my pastor for the first time, I felt like I was confessing a murder. I broke down in tears, crying and whimpering, and said, I watch porn. His pastor helped him understand that watching porn was not necessarily a ticket to hell. The student continues, my pastor smiled and let me know that a lot of people my age do this. Throughout our somewhat awkward conversation, he kept reminding me that what I was experiencing was perfectly normal, and it certainly would not condemn me forever. He did, however, let me know that God gives us the power to turn away from lust. On a piece of paper, he wrote down this quote from Swedenborg. This is the only quote from Swedenborg in the book. Swedenborg is there, the deeper teachers are there, but we wanted to make sure that we didn't overwhelm college students with quotes from Swedenborg so that the book could be received as a universal theology. This was the quote from Swedenborg. The smallest amount of divine power is enough every time it is called on to tame instantly the entire devil's crew, even if it consisted of millions. I'd like to read it.
Consisted of what?
Yeah, I'm going to read that one again. I'm going to read it loud, George. Are you ready? Okay. The smallest amount of divine power is enough every time it is called on to tame instantly the devil's crew, even if it consisted of millions. So the smallest amount of divine power called upon can tame the devil's crew. I think this is what Jesus meant when he said, if you have faith, even as a mustard seed. The Lord is all powerful, and he can keep those lusts away from us. The meeting with his pastor had good results. It helped him to let go of useless self-condemnation and forgive himself. He writes, I have learned that lust is dangerous and addictive, but it does not condemn anyone to hell, especially if you acknowledge that it is wrong and try to overcome it. The quote that my pastor gave me has been especially helpful in this struggle. It remains my biggest spiritual tool. Just beautiful. Well, so that's forgiving ourselves. Another aspect of this commandment is forgiving others. And I've got a beautiful journal entry to read to you about this one. This is a little bit longer, but it sure is worth sharing. Okay, the word adultery is related to the Latin word, this is me and star writing. The word adultery is related to the Latin word adulterare, which means to make impure what is pure. In religious terms, to commit spiritual adultery is to defile something that is holy. For example, when you harbor grudges and resentments against others, you defile something within yourself that is holy. You adulterate the pure love and compassion that flow in from God. To better understand and overcome this level of adultery, the forgiveness inventory can be helpful. And we have a forgiveness inventory that the students go through. Among other things, this inventory offers you an opportunity to think about what you might gain by hanging on to resentments. I mean, I'm not going to ask for show of hands, but how many of us have resentments that we still hang on to? Every now and then they crop up. What do we gain from hanging on to them, and what you might gain by giving them up? After filling out the inventory, one student wrote a journal entry titled, "This would be a good class for you, Dad." He begins by discussing the worksheet. He writes, and here comes his journal entry. "This is about the forgiveness inventory you gave us to fill out. I thought of something right away and started writing about it. I don't like to think about this issue because it brings back bad memories, but here goes. When I was about 10 years old, my parents told us they were getting divorced." Oh, by the way, teenagers, you can listen again now. Okay. "When I was about 10 years old, my parents told us that they were getting divorced, but it wasn't finalized until much later. So for about a year, my dad was not living at home, since he was just down the street. I would get to see him every once in a while and sometimes sleep over on the weekends. One day while I was at Dad's house, I heard him talking to a lady on the phone, and he got me to talk to her a little bit. Dad asked me if I wanted to make the drive down to Washington to see her and stay the night. I just wanted to be with Dad, so whatever he wanted to do, I wanted to do. We spent the night there and drove back in the morning. I remember this next scene vividly. I was coming home later than I usually would after spending the night at Dad's. He dropped me off at home and got out of the car and talked to me in the driveway. He got down on one knee to my level and told me that if Mom asked me why I'm home a little later than usual, to just tell her we went to McDonald's for breakfast. I asked him why, and he said, "Just do it." I said, "Okay," and I walked inside. One of the first things Mom asked me was why I was home later than usual. Dad called it. I told her we went to McDonald's, and that was the end of that. I didn't feel bad or anything because I was just doing what Dad told me to do. A few weeks later, Mom and I were going to the drugstore. I don't remember how it came up, but I ended up telling her that Dad and I went to Washington that one day. She asked me if I spent the night. When I told her yes, she started to cry. At the time, I did not know what was going on. To this day, I haven't spoken about this with my dad. I love him and everything, and we get along great, but I just can't get myself to forgive him. Not yet, at least. I don't like thinking or talking about my dad because it brings up too many memories, like this one. He completely took advantage of my innocence, and it has changed our relationship greatly. As it stands right now, I don't want to forgive him because I don't think he deserves it. Maybe my opinion will change. I don't know. Let's give it another 10 years and we'll see where we're at. Well, this was written about 7 or 8 years ago. So Star and I decided, why don't we give him a call and see if things have changed? So we called him. We write here in the book, several years later, while we were working on this chapter, we called the student who had said, let's give it another 10 years and we'll see where we're at. We reminded him about his journal entry. We reread it to him and said, if you are willing to talk about it, we would love to know where you are at. He was willing. So we asked him, did you ever speak to your father about this incident, and did you ever forgive him? Here's what he said. I think about that memory from time to time. I have spoken to my father about it. I don't know what prompted it, but I'm pretty sure that doing the exercise made me think about it and made me want to have the conversation. It was so scary to bring up, but so necessary. It was very difficult. We were both emotional about it. I apologized for holding a grudge for so long. Dad apologized too. He said that he remembered that time and said that what he did was wrong. He said he shouldn't have done it. I'm glad I've forgiven him. I don't like carrying grudges. It doesn't serve anything for me except helping me stay mad. At the time, it actually felt good to be mad at someone who had wronged me, and I wanted to hang on to that anger. But the truth is, I don't like being mad at my dad. It doesn't help me grow and change and have good relationships. We asked if there was anything he wanted to add. Yes, he said. He wanted to talk about the power of dealing with the past, not just burying it. Here's what he said. It felt so good to get all of that out. It has helped me so much. I don't think about it the same way I used to anymore. It's officially put behind me as something that happened in my life. Before, like when I was in your class, it just brought up sad memories. But now, when I talk about it, it actually feels pretty good. We thanked him for the phone conversation and said that this would be a powerful example for future students who take the course. He said, this has been a powerful phone call from me as well. So there's a couple of journal entries about forgiving ourselves, forgiving others. I do have an exercise that we do with this commandment. It's called, you shall not commit adultery. And you all get to do this. So I've got some task cards for you, just like last time. If I could have some volunteers to help pass these out. And you get some sub-volunteers to help you out in the Royal Pastoral.
That's still goodbye.
Any extras?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, well, can I borrow one, because I'm going to read from one. If anyone didn't get any, I have some more copies. So the mark to aim at, we talked about the mark. In Greek, the word is harmatia, which is to sin, but actually it's from the Greek from an archery term meaning to miss the mark. And so the mark to aim at is do not commit adultery. Keep your thoughts clean, your motives pure, and your actions honorable. This is a week for honoring marriage. Do not commit adultery in thought, word, or deed. Instead, your aim is to keep your thoughts clean, your motives pure, and your actions honorable. When sexual allurements come up, think in terms of how this might affect your current relationship or potential marriage. On a deeper level, avoid any kind of negative emotion that might pollute and corrupt your heart. This includes any form of bitterness or resentment, harboring grudges, hanging on to resentment, and persisting in hardness of heart adulterates the pure love that is always available. Forgive yourself and forgive others, knowing that God is a God of forgiveness, or that forgiveness is your Buddha nature. In your journal, record your experience of practicing this commandment. So that would be the task for the week. And because we're doing a few commandments every day, that might be a task for you to think about. Not just adultery on the physical level, but more deeply adulterating the pure love and the pure compassion that's constantly flowing in from God by mixing it together with resentment and bitterness. We want to get the resentment and bitterness out so that we're not committing adultery, that our love is pure because it's God's love. Now, I just want to mention something very interesting from Buddhism. We show how all the different world religions deal with the various commandments. In Buddhism, there's a very, very heavy emphasis on being pure and untainted. And the Buddha says there is an impurity greater than all impurities. There is an impurity greater than all impurities. Now, this is really interesting because according to the Buddha, the greatest impurity of all is, anybody want to guess?
Sexual lust.
Sexual lust. You would think that, especially in the context of this commandment. That's a great impurity. But there's an impurity that leads to sexual lust, that leads to the violation of all the commandments, and that impurity is called, in Buddhism, ignorance. Ignorance is the greatest impurity. And here's why. The Buddha says, but there is an impurity that is greater than all impurities. This is ignorance. Rid yourselves of this greatest impurity, O monks. Then be free from all impurities. This is from the Dhammapada. Why is ignorance the greatest of all impurities? You might be asked. What about murder, adultery, stealing, and lying? The Buddha would say that these are all impurities, but the greatest impurity is ignorance, because ignorance of truth and the lack of self-awareness leads to selfish desires and materialistic cravings. When one is blindly led by these desires and cravings, it opens the way to all other evils. As Eknath Ishwaran puts it in his commentary on the Dhammapada, quote, the worst of all taints is ignorance, because it prevents us from seeing other impurities that consume us from within. That's why we teach. That's why there's a new church. That's why truth is so important. We don't want to be blind. We want our eyes to be open. We want to learn these commandments. So, the commandment against adultery, or you might say impurity, calls you to clean up those thoughts, attitudes, and intentions that might cause you to stray from the commandments. It calls you to look within and discover the impurities that would gradually destroy you like rust destroys iron. It calls you to pray for a steadfast spirit that will give you the power to resist every sin forbidden by the commandments. That's why David, after asking God to wash him thoroughly from the sin of adultery, Psalm 51:2, he had committed adultery with Bathsheba, and that whole psalm is about his prayer for forgiveness. He concludes with this prayer, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a firm spirit within me. To conclude, the children who were able to resist eating the first marshmallow were on the right track. Self-restraint, impulse control, and the ability to delay gratification are admirable virtues. Ultimately, however, sitting on one's hands, distracting oneself, and other forms of white knuckling are not enough. Like David, you will eventually need to find your strength, not in mere willpower, but rather in a higher power, one that will give you the strength to resist more than a marshmallow. Thank you. So the floor is now open for comments, questions, thoughts. Yes?
My name is Dean. Hello, Ian. I have a problem with the ignorance thing. So I feel like if I don't know that I'm doing, like smoking a cigarette, all right? I smoke cigarettes, I used to, and I was ignorant perhaps the first time I did it, but after I had done it, I knew I was doing something wrong. But if I don't know I'm doing something wrong, how can that be the worst? How can that be the worst when you don't even know that it's wrong?
Right, you'll have to take that up with Buddha.
Well, he's not here, right?
I
So.
know, okay. No, Jesus did say, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
That know not what they do.
What they do. I think what the Buddha may have meant by that this is the worst of all problems. Because if you don't know that something is wrong, you're gonna get yourself into a lot of trouble and do a lot of wrong things. That's why we teach kids, because they were, well, like Swedenborg says, we're born with no knowledge to acquire all knowledge. So the Buddha may be overstating the case somewhat, but I think the spirit of what he's saying is, if you don't have this knowledge, you're gonna be committing all these evils. Does that sound fair?
Yes, it does.
Good, thanks. Thank you. Yes.
Nancy, that saying ignorance is bliss is very false. Ignorance is never bliss. It's just an excuse.
Thank you. Yeah, wherever that came from, ignorance is bliss. The Buddha didn't say that. Jesus didn't say that. Yeah. Thank you, Nancy. Yes.
Sage. Well, I'm thinking about my 5-year-old who I think probably would fail the marshmallow test. And impulses are, and just sort of how our genetics play out in the way that we behave. And I think he's sort of wired to be impulsive, and we're working on that. But I wonder what your thoughts are on kind of the need to be active in our lives and to take chances, and how we sort of balance that with this idea of self-discipline. So I can sort of think of examples of people who were maybe so disciplined or reserved that they didn't seek love or seek relationship. So maybe there's a little bit of usefulness. I want to know my son's going to have a chance at happiness, and I think he will. But there's sort of a balance there, maybe. Would you think so?
Thank you. That word balance was hovering on the edges there. Yeah, and you've got bracelets here that from Helen Keller. Life is either a daring adventure or is nothing.
Right.
And one of our children, who shall remain nameless, was a big risk taker. And I kept saying to this child, why don't you put those risks on the spiritual level? You know, take spiritual leaps. And in this book, actually, we have in the chapter on not taking the Lord's name in vain, we talk about Geronimo. Any of you, when you were kids, did you ever take that leap and say, Geronimo? And you would take that leap. And did anybody know, by the way, how that came about?
Parachutes.
Yeah, right. There was these men jumping out of planes. They had just seen the movie Geronimo. I think they were in the Air Force or the Army, but they were jumping out of, and in order to give themselves courage to jump out, they'd all shout, Geronimo! And so in here, I asked them to take the leap of faith. Believe that there really is a God who's looking out for you. Even if you don't really believe that, take the leap of faith and believe that. Cry Geronimo. And there's a beautiful song called Geronimo. But yeah, you're right. We want to be spontaneous about the things that we need to be spontaneous about, and we need to be reserved about the things we need to be reserved about. And I think learning these truths teaches us which things to be spontaneous about and which things to be reserved about. Does that help? Yeah.
Could you say something about the fact that a lot of young people that I've talked to say, well, God created this urge for a special purpose to populate the heavens. I mean, so the children would be born and it would populate the heavens. And then we're talking about wisdom and bringing the two together so they have an idea of saving it for the right person. So could you say something about connecting the fact that the Lord created that, and I don't think they're using it as an excuse. I think they're right. The Lord created it. So could you connect with something with that?
Yeah, maybe start me with this, but I think, yeah, we have lots of powerful urges. Hunger is a powerful urge too. And sometimes if you're hungry, you'll eat anything, right? But you want to eat the right thing. And so sexuality is a powerful urge too, but you want to express it in the right way. So we acknowledge the power of these urges, because if we didn't eat, we would die. And if we didn't procreate, the earth would no longer have human beings. We want to do these things the right way. Start.
I thank you.
Oh, you have to identify yourself.
My name's Star. Lois, thank you for that comment. And I think the idea, as I understand in Swedenborg's writings, is not only the procreation, but it's the desire to protect what has been procreated. So it's not just the urge to procreate, but it's also the desire to protect what's procreated, and those two have to come together. And that has an element of thinking about consequences and a future and the growth of the child as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Other folks? Yes.
Oh, something like.
You have to identify yourself first.
I'm Sandy Hinson, and this when the Lord was on the cross, approaching death, had completed, just about completed the crucifixion, and he said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." That has always been a mystery to me, because the chosen people, which we know the Hebrew people were in the ancient world, they were truly chosen. God did not even know the Arab population, it's what it said. And so then after the crucifixion, which we know was a great mistake, great travesty, even though it was fully predicted, in Isaiah, where does anti-Semitism come from? Forgive them, for they know what they do, but look what followed it. It's still with us. David had 300 wives and concubines, 300. That Uriah, that Bathsheba error was not only an error of adultery, but it was the murder of Uriah, which he perpetrated 100%. He already had how many? 299 wives and concubines. Solomon had 1,000. And Solomon's deterioration went from being the wise man that he was, and he was a wise man, to deteriorating into idolatrous religions, having been persuaded by so many idolatrous wives and concubines. That's what it says in the scripture.
Well, I think this is part of the reason that the Lord had to come again, that people were not getting it. And so he had to come in the flesh, and then people still didn't get it, so he made a second coming. And now we're living in the presence of that second coming, the truth that will lead us into all truth. And speaking of that second coming, there's a very, very beautiful teaching about the highest marriage. We're talking about marriage and adultery today, and I'll conclude with this, that there's a marriage that every one of us has with the Lord. This is the highest form of marriage, whether we're single or married, adulterers or not. There is a marriage that we can enter right now in every moment. And the Lord is wishing, like a father, like a husband, to fill us with the seeds of goodness and truth. And we need to be open to that and not adulterate that with negativity and resentments. So we put the resentments, the negativity to the side, and we say, Lord, I am your wife. This doesn't matter whether we're a man or a woman. I am your wife. I am your bride. You are my husband, and I receive from you the seeds of goodness and truth. And in that way, every one of us enters into the heavenly marriage. Thank you for your attention.
Amen.